George Haas here. So I wanted to finish up talking about the different attachment strategies. You can't do that, Matt. It really bugs me. Please don't. It needs to be done first. Anyway, I want to talk about the unresolved attachment strategy. This category applies to all of the different attachment strategies. So what that means is that with any of the other four attachment strategies we looked at, you could have an unresolved component. It is not the thing that happens to you. It is not the difficult or painful experience that causes the unresolved component. It is the lack of resolution, a lapse of reasoning around the painful or difficult situation that causes an unresolved classification. Integration of the experience is key to repair. I'm reading on this list. Dissociation is a central and defining feature of unresolved attachment. So when we say unresolved attachment, what we mean is that dissociation becomes the primary means of emotional regulation. A lack of coherent memory tends to be more problematic of unresolved attachment strategists. So dissociating the experiences of life interferes with the way that you form memories around the experiences of life, which then causes problems with the formation of a coherent narrative about what happens. It also creates additional problems in the sense that we don't learn in the same way that people who don't dissociate learn. In some sense, we evaluate the pattern of sensing experience. We interpret what that sensing experience is from a database of previous sensing experiences. We have also an awareness of the solutions that we took or the actions that we took in response to the sensing experiences that we experienced, and then we also track the outcome from those particular actions, and that creates this sense of a database of what to do. If the experience arises and our response to it is dissociation, then we don't record the experience, we don't record the action we thought to take, we don't record the outcome, and so it prevents us from developing a robust database of how to respond to experiences in the world. So we may find that we constantly respond to similar patterns of experience in the same way that we've always done, without any progression, without any learning. There's a lack of development in brain structures tying the regulating hippocampus, orbital frontal cortex, and corpus callosum to the amygdala, causing a disorganizing attachment experience, wordless, timeless, without context. So we have the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, and they're in a kind of concerted interplay. The sympathetic nervous system arises, the amygdala activates in response to the perception of danger in the world, and the hippocampus evaluates whether the danger is real or not, and then in concert with these other brain structures dampens down the amygdala if the situation isn't real. It doesn't require actually a response because it's actually dangerous. In a dissociative experience, the interplay doesn't happen in that way, and we become activated and slow to settle. And we can often have this disorganized experience, this trance-like state that results from that interaction. We like to talk about a distinction between large T trauma and small T trauma. Big T trauma are single events of big loss, say loss of a parent in childhood or accident, something like that. And then small T trauma are these misattunements, these small events, hundreds or thousands of them over the course of the relationship with your caregiver, which creates this experience of incoherency in the narrative about what happened to us when we developed in our family systems. There's two types of dissociation. One is a kind of disintegration, a self-protective splitting off of an unbearable mind state. This tends to present itself with an all or nothing, black or white, either or thinking that produce experiences of self and others that are compartmentalized. Sorry. Oversimplified, unrealistic, and unstable. So human beings either become helpers or enemies, good or bad, rescuers or victims. And the other end, and this is a kind of spectrum, one pole is this kind of black and white thinking, this rigidity in thought. And the other end is a kind of trance-like state where we remove ourselves from the experience of the present moment. The trance-like state is where really a lot of the difficulty comes in relationships. They're unstable and stormy, difficult to count on. Imagine you're in a conversation with somebody and your principal means of emotional regulation is dissociation. And in an adult relationship where often emotions can run strong because of conflict, that each time an emotional event exceeds your ordinary capacity to manage it, you regulate it by dissociating. So you're coming and going from awareness of the present moment, coming and going from the awareness of the experience of the other person. You're still engaged in conversation with him. It's just that your receiving of it, your understanding of it, is lost depending on how intense the trance-like state is. You may even agree to conditions that are being set forth by your partner in these discussions, but you don't register them, you don't remember them, and so then you act as if you hadn't made that agreement, and the other party is thinking, you made this agreement, I was there, I was present for that experience, and now you're saying that you don't remember making that agreement, or you don't show, or all of the other things that can come about from this. That adversely impacts the relationship, and you fall into the category of someone who's unreliable. That spacing out, that blunting of the experience of the present moment is the way that these difficult emotional experiences are regulated. So in some sense, the coming in and out of reality is a way of, or coming in and out of awareness of the present moment is the way of managing the experience of it. So adding this piece of the unresolved attachment strategy really to any of the others, unresolved secure attachment, these kinds of couplings of attachment strategies tend to be around single event, big T trauma, so that something happens to a securely attached person and the coherency around that single event isn't actually whole, but overall the coherent narrative of the rest of the life is pretty much intact. If you look at, say, an unresolved dismissing strategist, this tends to map onto the Masterson's sociopath or narcissistic personality disorder. The tendency to idealize and to derogate, which is the hallmarks of the dismissing strategist, when combined with the dissociation, creates this removal of the experience of the other person's distress or pain in the actions that you take. In the unresolved, preoccupied, fearful preoccupied, for instance, an unresolved, fearful preoccupied person would map onto the Masterson model of borderline personality disorder. Coming and going constantly, not really aware of the intensity of the reaction, of the response that can be put out into the world, and then a confusion about the reaction that the other person is having because there hasn't been that presence in the interaction. In unresolved, fearful avoidant, this increases the lack of reliability it decreases the lack of reliability in the fearful avoidant, the removal from the difficulty, so that you find that it creates a greater sense of social isolation here for that particular strategist. So these 5 are the adult experiences. If we look at unresolved as an understanding of what happens to cause this, and why in the child category, when people are still young and in childhood, some people resolve from this highly disorganized dissociative state in childhood to adults that don't use it primarily as dissociation, don't use dissociation as the primary means of their emotional regulation, and some children mature into adults and still use the strategy. I think the thought is that the disorganization in childhood can come either from a parent being frightened of providing care for the child and the child's reaction to that, or it can come from the child being frightened of the caregiver. When the child is frightened of the caregiver, that tends to push you across the trauma line. And so when children who are disorganized and dissociative in childhood, the children whose parents were frightened of providing care for them tend to resolve in the maturation process the use of dissociation as a primary means of emotional regulation, whereas the children who actually faced abuse grow up continuing to use the dissociative strategy. So next week, we'll talk about how the interactions of these different strategies relate to the use of intoxicating substances and behaviors that tend to form the basis of addiction, so that we can begin to map out how the different attachment strategies work in regard to that.